And welcome back to Business in Motion, a program that focuses on business and entrepreneurship from an Afrocentric perspective. I'm your host, RGL Biz Coach, and I will say that I am so happy that I decided to beam in the earth at the time that I did for the music. I just think that the music that my generation got to experience has been the best music ever in the history of time, in the history of music. You know, just listen to Stevie Wonder, and there's just so many more. But oh wow, I'm just in love with the music. Anyway, as I was about to come in, I got a phone call today, and it was like, I know this number, I know the name that was with the number, but I didn't really put it together. And then the gentleman spoke, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew exactly who it was. So I told him to tune in. Hopefully they're listening to Andre and Lisa. Hopefully you guys are tuning in and checking out the show. But anyway, again, I just want to say, I just want to do the shout out for you, because we hadn't seen each other. We hadn't talked in a long, long time. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get into this. Time goes by very, very quickly again. So as I told you, I was going to give you a 5-year plan to become a millionaire investing in Baltimore real estate. And just look at some of the facts. Again, as you pretty much already know, that Baltimore has been rated the #1 city in America for real estate investors who rent out properties. A large percentage of the population in Baltimore are rely on they rely on renting versus home ownership. And, it's good, and then it's not so good. And you can take this. It's a matter of taking a situation in which I always believe, to give you lemons, make lemonade with it. So you look at something that might not appear to be so positive, and you figure out how to do something positive with it. And one thing that's unique about Baltimore happens to be the cost factor with a lot of the real estate. And I'll tell you, when things change, because it will, simply because Washington, D.C., which is only 45 minutes away, and you can get there faster than that if you speed a little bit. But anyway, Washington, D.C., the prices have gone so high that I think for the younger generation to be able to become homeowners, they're not going to have much of a choice but start looking at alternative markets. And the thing about about Baltimore is it's very close. Now, the thing is, Baltimore doesn't have all the jobs and everything like D.C. does. But still, if you're just taking into consideration if you're younger and getting out of college, or maybe you got whatever, but let's say you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, and you want home ownership and you haven't bought before, it'll take a lot for that person to actually buy a home in the District of Columbia today, simply, again, just based on price. So you take this into consideration, this strategy that I want to run down as an investor. As an investor, here's what you do. A 5-year plan. And what the plan consists of is 4 properties per year that you want to acquire. And we're going to run this down. Now, with the real estate program that I'm speaking of, you can look at it in 3 phases. The first phase being acquisition, the second one being transformation, and the third being your disposition. And so what you do, you work in these 3 areas, and that's where you place your focus. And if you are persistent, now, one thing I didn't mention here is mindset. You have to have the proper mindset when you get into real estate, because like any other business, and I can't speak for all businesses, I have some understanding about what it takes to do business just based on all of my schooling, in business management. But entering into the real estate business, it takes work. There is work. I've seen many people get into the business because it looks attractive on the outside, and once they get into it and they deal with all the variances and nuances associated with it, the liabilities, and before you know it, they're out. Well, a lot of those, either, number one, they didn't have a good game plan, or number two, a lot of people just don't like the stressors that the business will actually create, because it can be stressful. And so with this system that I'm speaking of, with this 5-year plan, I want to give some things where, again, you can mitigate as many liabilities as possible, and you can operate your business as stress-free as you possibly can. And so let's go ahead and let's get started. So the first thing you want to do in this 5-year plan to develop or to become a millionaire, you want to get your funding. You want to make sure that you are positioned so that when the good deal comes up, that you can actually buy it. And I'll tell you how this typically works. I would assume that many of you probably don't have the cash in the bank to go out and just pay cash for some of these properties. So therefore, you're going to have to resort to getting them financed. And in getting them financed, many of the properties that I'm speaking of, there are various routes that you can take. You can take more traditional route, and that is just getting institutional financing. But one of the drawbacks to traditional finance and going through institutions, going through a bank, is the fact that you have to qualify for the loan. And with your living expenses that you already have, it's going to create a barrier that most of you aren't going to be able to overcome. So I'm going to speak on private funding. What you want to do, the first thing is to contact these private lenders, and you can just pull them up online now. A lot of them are going to be listed as hard money lenders, hard money brokers, private lending. You'll see all three. And you contact them and you find out what type of loans they will make. Now, most of them, now all of them are going to be recourse loans. And what I mean by recourse is you're going to have to be liable for the debt. But many of them, you don't have to go through what traditional institutions require, and that is looking at your income, debt to income ratios, your credit score and all of these things. Now, a lot of them, some private lenders do look at your credit score. Many times they're going to make sure they don't want to see where you got bankruptcies just last year and a lot of things going on like that. But most of the times it is based, your ability to borrow is going to be based on the quality of the deal. So put that in mind, or jot that down first of all, the quality of the deal. And what you do is go ahead and you make your application with them. You make yourself known to that lender and just prepare yourself. Now, with most of them, it's not that they're just going to give you 100% financing, but what seems to be pretty standard today is if the deal is a good deal, then what they'll do is they'll say, well, how much experience do you have doing this? And I'm assuming that you don't have any experience. So if you don't have any experience, you're typically going to have 20 to 30% of the purchase price, that they're going to want to see that amount of your own money infused into the transaction. Now, once you can prove that, you show that, and then there are going to be settlement charges, because you just have your customary settlement charge, and then they typically charge what's called points. Points is a means, or it's another fee that the lender gets to charge to enhance his return on investment. Is basically all it is. So you're going to need that money, and let's say I'm going to talk about a typical Baltimore property in a neighborhood that is transitioning. Let's say that you find a property, and the property, let's say it's $50,000. So again, if you got to have 20%, that means you need $10,000 plus you're going to need some other fees. Now what you're going to have to do is you have, with these lenders, what they will do is fund 100% of the renovation cost, which is a blessing. Oh my God, that is but again, they don't just give you the 100% up front. It's typically done in tranches where they will do an inspection, and based on the amount of work that's done, they will give you that money. So that means that still you're going to have a little extra cash to be able to give to the contractor to get the contractor going. So that's first and foremost, is to get qualified for the money, know where your money is coming from, so that when you identify a good deal, you can act on it. Step number 2, identify contractors. And I'm telling you right off the bat, what you want to start with are professional licensed contractors. And just because they hold a license doesn't mean that they can do quality work. So you want to check them out and make sure that you are satisfied with the level of work that they have done in the past. Never ever think that, maybe some of the jobs they've done weren't that good, they're going to do a good one on your job. No, you make sure you vet that contractor, and you probably want to do a number of them. I would say vet at least 3 of them. Check them all out. Check out their work. If you can go and speak to their previous customers, talk to them, see if they were able to start on time. Did they finish on time? Were there major overruns? Because those things are going to come back to haunt you. And you want to make sure that you have the best contractor that you can. And it's better to pay a little bit more to get the quality contractor than it is to try and go low budget, because that never ever works. It never works. Just go and just get the best contractors you can find and have them ready, and make sure that when you make settlement that they're going to be able to jump on the job and start knocking this renovation out. Time equals money. I'll say that again. Time equals money when you're talking about doing a renovation to a property. You want to be able to get in, get work done, and get ready to take it to your next step as soon as possible. And another thing you could do when you're acquiring a property, I don't think it's that important to have a full home inspection, but it can be good to go ahead when you actually buy the property is to have a full home inspection. But the reason I say what I would really recommend is, well, if it's the first time, go ahead and get the full home inspection. So this way you get a list. The home inspector is going to go through with a fine-tooth comb. Is going to pick out anything that doesn't look right with that property. They're going to list it. So now you got something to work with. You got something that you can pass on. But the renovations that I'm speaking of, especially if you're buying a property that's around $50,000, means that you're going to have to do substantial work to that property. You're probably going to have to replace plumbing, electrics, heat and air conditioning, all those systems. And you definitely want to make sure that you're in compliance with your federal, state, and local laws, especially when it comes to lead. Any lead that's in the house needs to be abated. The worst thing in the world to do is to go through, do a renovation, leave lead in it, or you leave some of those moldings and things like that in the property, and it's got that, those old homes that got that lead-based paint on them, and you find out 10 years later, you slap with a lawsuit because it was discovered that they got lead in the body when they happen to be living in your home. So make sure that the lead has been abated from these properties. You don't want to have to deal with those issues, all right? But most of all, the home inspection is even more important when it is time, when you're selling that property. It always comes back. Sellers never want to see that. But again, in a way, it's kind of good, because then the buyer can't come back and say, well, look, I didn't know this. You knew this, and you didn't divulge that information. So home inspections are actually good on both ends. Again, looking at the positivity of anything, because there is positive in almost everything that you are doing. And that holds true with this real estate. Number 3, okay, so now you've got your funding down, you've identified a contractor. Next thing you have to do now is identify the property. And typically the way that you identify a property, what most people do is they work through an agent. Real estate agents provide a lot of service, quite a bit of work, and they'll do a lot of things for you with no charge. Best I recommend is you find that good agent. You want to develop a learning relationship where the agent knows you, they learn you, they know what you're looking for and all, and you also learn in the agent. It's a two-way. It's a two-way street there. But once that occurs, you have what is referred to as the learning relationship, and the rapport has been built and everything. Believe me, that agent can supply you with a lot of homes. They'll be able to supply you with homes that you'll need throughout this 5-year journey that you're going to be on, that's going to enable you to become a millionaire. So again, you want to identify that property, and as I mentioned before, you can have the home inspection done so you know exactly what you're doing, and you want to make sure that the renovation is done, it is up to code, making sure that you're getting all of the inspections from the county. They're coming through, because certain things, like even for closing, and what I mean by closing is, if this home has been gutted out and you got new insulation, you got new ventilation, and your plumbing and your electrics have all been run before they can close it in. And when I'm saying close it in, before they can put the drywall up, is the inspector has to come again, and he's got to take a look at it. And they got to make sure that all those things are up to code before they will allow that contractor to do what's called a close-in, where they can start putting the drywall up. So anyway, again, this has to do all again with the quality of the contractor, the profits you've gotten, and all of that. So now, as you're moving on, okay, you want to get to this next step, all right, which is, kind of what I was referring to as the renovation. I hit it on that just a little bit. But what I want to emphasize is, if you've done a good job at selecting the property that you're buying, many times a lot of your profit is done right up front. It's based on how well you negotiated your acquisition. That has to do like almost every time, that's going to have an impact on what you're able to make from this property or how much equity that you're going to have. So you've done a good job at doing that. And then you do the renovation and it's up to par. And when the job is completed, you're going to be creating, the renovation process creates equity so that when you're completed, you have built-in equity in the property. And this is, what mainly flippers live for. And I can tell you some of the percentages that lenders look at and some that you should adhere to, I will say is when that property is completed, all things done, you got hard costs, you have soft costs. But when you combine all of the charges that you have invested into the property, you don't want to be above about 70%. Okay? And that's considered the loan to value ratio, or how much, your cost to value ratio. If you're around the 70%, it doesn't matter about the amount that a property is going to be sold for. You're sitting pretty well off. You're pretty good because you can sell it if you want to, and you're going to make a decent profit. Keep in mind again, I'm quite sure you've watched HGTV and you've seen a lot of these renovation programs on. And one thing I give them credit is they do always show that the uncertainty occurs. There's always something that the owner didn't know that they were going to run into, but they always show that on these programs. It's like, oh my God, okay, we have to pull this out, and these beams had rotted out, and so we've got to factor the cost in for those things. And I say that because that is so true. It's always the unexpected occurs, and so you want to make sure that you have a contingency fund. Once the contractor has outlined, and the best that the contractor should do, the best thing for you, is to itemize each item and show the cost. And then you want to have a contingency plan. That is a certain amount of money that's over and above that fee, because the uncertainty is going to occur and you're going to have to spend money on some things that you didn't know you were going to have to spend money on. Now, we're going to go into the disposition. So we dealt with the acquisition, we've dealt with the transformation, and now there's the disposition. And in this 5-year plan to become the millionaire, what I'm saying to you is you don't want to buy the property and improve it and sell it. That's called a flip. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is you want to buy the property with the intention of renting it out. You want to rent the property out. Now, that has implications on a lot of things and major tax implications, simply because if you're buying a property to flip it, that's your intent. And so therefore, you got to pay taxes on that gain. It's like ordinary income. Well, if you buy the property and keep it for at least 1 year, you rent it out and you sell it a year and a day later, and that was the intent. I don't mean you bought it and you stuck it on the market, you flipped it, you're trying to flip it, but it just didn't sell because your intent was to flip it. If that's the case, ordinary income, which profit. But if you do it the other way, where you bought it and the objective is to rent it out, and you rent it for more than a year, now you don't pay ordinary income. It's capital gain, but you're taxed at a much lower rate. I want to get into tax rates. That's for your tax people. They can talk to you about that. So, but again, the what I like, it's what is referred to as a lease purchase, and I'm gonna tell you why. Is because, if you just rent the property out, a lot of people in Baltimore, a lot of landlords, they're going to rent to people who might have some sort of a subsidy, or, they're being that rent is being subsidized by the government, which fine, I don't have any problem with that, and I've done those. But what I like best is what is referred to is either a lease option or the lease purchase. And out of the two, I like the lease purchase, and the reason being is because with a lease purchase, you can structure it where certain things go wrong with the property, the leasee, that person can be responsible for it versus you. Because one of the worst things that drives landlords crazy is to get these calls and say, well, the light bulb ain't working, or, these different things like that. So you can pass a lot of those things over. If it's something major, sure, then as a landlord, you should be responsible. And I'm speaking of before they actually go to settlement when they're purchasing. Because with a lease purchase, they are buying it. There's a contract to buy, and there's a date as to when they're going to buy However, they're going to be living in it and they're renting leading up to that date. And that's what makes the lease purchase. And you can structure it so many ways. You can even have it so that maybe the rents are inflated, but because you're going to give a portion of what they're paying is over and above fair market rent, it's going to go back, or you're going to give some sort of credit towards the purchase price. But there are just a number of ways that you can actually structure this. But I love it simply because it eliminates so many headaches associated with real estate ownership as a landlord. Now, you've gone through these steps. You've identified your tenant who's going to come in and they're going to do a lease purchase. And so you know when they're going to go to contract. When they're going to go settlement. And so the next step you want to do is go ahead, get your lease agreement, everything signed. They move into the property, and now you need to go and refinance the property. You got to refinance it. By refinancing, you get to pay off your lender. You get rid of that debt. If you're lucky, you might be able to put a little money in your pocket. And the beauty is you don't have to declare that money as income because it's not income. It's loan. That's just a loan when you refinance. And that is, really great. And that now they have these new, what is referred to as DSCR loans. Just remember that, DSCR loans. And the beauty of those loans is that it's based on cash flow that's coming through. It's based on what that property is generating, what it's creating for you, versus all of the other criteria that's taken into consideration through just regular traditional bank institution loans for doing a refinance. Once you go through the refinance process, you repeat the process. And now what I'm saying to you is you can structure this. You can structure this once it's refinanced, whereas you should be able to be in a property and out about every 90 days. That's going to allow you to do 4 properties within a year. Each one of those properties, I won't go over the numbers now just based on time, but you should have a minimum. You should structure it and make sure that you identify it where you got a minimum of $50,000 equity in each one of those properties. And the contract that you have signed to sell that property, you want to assure that maybe it's even a little more than that, because when they're going to be buying, it could be a year down the road, it could be 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. But you kind of want to take that into consideration based on what the price is going to be that they're going to get it for. You duplicate this process, and if you're doing one property every 90 days, that's 4 years times 5 is 20 properties. That's your $1 million. That is your million. And I'll say this one other thing. Let's say that if one of the persons come in and say, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and we want to buy. We're ready to actually buy the property before your 5 years is up, or 1 year, whatever. What you want to do is what is referred to as a 1031 tax exchange. And with the 1031 tax exchange, that means that all of the profits that are generated from the sale of that property, because it was an investment property for you, it was one that you were going to be renting out, you roll that back into another property, and you're not taxed on any of the profits. You can't beat that. And if you want to know more, I say go to the website platinumdynamicinstitute.com and just key in some information. So if you're listening, if you want to know more about this and learn more about how to get engaged in making your $1 million over the next 5 years, putting your $1 million plan together, do that. platinumdynamicinstitute.com. Key in the information, and I'll get back to you personally. I'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.